This is that Israel is indeed pressing ahead with its offensive in Rafah. That's in defiance of global calls for it to halt its military operations. Eyewitnesses saying that tanks have been spotted pushing into the heart of the city. They were spotted at the Al-Awda Mosque, as you can see here on this map. That this is a landmark in central Rafah. Elsewhere, Israeli forces also reportedly in complete control of the Philadelphia corridor. Now, that's a narrow strip of land that runs right along Gaza's border with Egypt, right up to the Mediterranean Sea. Strategically important because it was created to prevent the transfer, the smuggling of goods between Egypt and Gaza. And yesterday as well, Israeli forces accused once again of striking a camp for displaced people, this time in Al-Mawasi. That's a evacuation zone just west of Rafah. Gaza health officials saying at least 21 Palestinians were killed. The IDF has vehemently denied those reports, but it does come on the back of international condemnation of another strike carried out by the IDF on Sunday night, in which 45 Palestinians were killed, amongst them women and children.
Right. Well, we'd seen the ICJ, the International Court of Justice. It ordered Israel to halt its Rafah offensive last week. Earlier, we heard from the ICC, the chief prosecutor, requesting arrest warrants for Benjamin Netanyahu and top Israeli leaders. So the pressure on Israel is mounting. But is it having any impact?
Well, Karis, I think never before has Israel come under such sustained legal and diplomatic pressure from the international community. Let's just remind viewers of the pressure that Israel is under. You can see there on your screen, more than a week ago, the International Criminal Court, as you mentioned, requested arrest warrants for Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant, the Israeli Prime Minister and Israeli Defense Minister. That puts those two men in the same company of leaders like Vladimir Putin and Omar al-Bashir, the former dictator of Sudan. Then last Friday, the ICJ, that's the UN's top court, ordered Israel to halt its offensive in Rafah. And just yesterday, of course, we had those three European countries, Spain, Ireland and Norway, formally recognizing Palestinian statehood, a move that's largely seen as being symbolic. Now, it's very unlikely that the ICC will ever get Benjamin Netanyahu or Yoav Gallant in the dock. The US and UK have already criticised the ICC over that move. It's also equally unlikely that Israel will heed the ICJ's ruling, the UN's top court, to halt its offensive in Rafah. Remember that the ICJ's rulings are legally binding, but it has no enforcement mechanism. So the question you may be asking then is, what is the impact of this pressure? Well, in the short term, it won't stop fighting on the ground. That means that Israel will continue its offensive in Rafah. There will probably be more civilian casualties. However, there will be more and more reputational damage done to Israel, and more Israel is looking like an isolated country, almost entirely reliant on the US for support. So then the other question you may ask is, why is Israel continuing its offensive in Rafah then? What does it have to gain? Well, to answer that question, we can look at what Benjamin Netanyahu said earlier this week when he spoke to the Israeli parliament. And the key phrase there is right at the end: I don't intend to end the war before every goal has been achieved. And the key takeaway here is that after 7 months of war, Israel hasn't achieved its military objectives. Top Hamas leaders are still at large. Hostages are still being held. And if Netanyahu stops the war now, then right-wing members of his coalition will probably withdraw. That would cause his government to collapse. So a lot of this is down to Benjamin Netanyahu's political survival.
Right, and meanwhile, the United Nations Security Council met Tuesday to discuss that strike that you mentioned that hit Rafah on Sunday. What came out of that?
So what happened last night was that Algeria tabled a draft resolution to members of the Security Council. In that resolution, it called for an immediate ceasefire and the release of hostages. It drew on the ICJ ruling calling on Israel to halt its offensive. The draft resolution also said that the catastrophic situation in Gaza was a threat to international peace and security. That's some of the toughest language we've seen yet coming out of the Security Council with regards to the war in Gaza. Diplomats saying there could be a vote in the next few days on that resolution. However, what tends to happen in these cases is that Israel usually enjoys the protection of the US, which sits as a permanent member of the Security Council, so it has veto power. The US has so far shielded Israel from 3 resolutions on Gaza using its veto power, but Washington does occasionally abstain from votes. That's its way of exerting pressure on its ally. It did that notably in March, you'll recall, when the Security Council called for an immediate ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. Otherwise, what the US has done in the past, and what it may very well do this time, is to veto the resolution and to propose its own draft resolution with watered-down language in the form of a compromise.